Behold this hardscrabble farm, long empty of cows, its puzzle-piece fields locking in islands of rock. Like the St. Lawrence, another newcomer observed recently, but with fields for water. See these particular fields, still hayed every summer. For how much longer, who knows? On this day in mid-March, look at the way the last snow lines each dead furrow, all of them dead straight and parallel, pillowing gently the narrow brown lanes of sod, like a down comforter with lines of white stitches. Wilson Stevenson, my grandfather, loved horses, an old neighbor says, and staring out the window this early spring morning, 53 years after his death at 90, how clearly it still shows. He knew how to plow and took pride in plowing well. What greater legacy could a man want? Work well done, name forgotten, overgrown pastures closing in on his performance, returning without applause to trees. We should have a name for our place, Little Tree Farm, because for several reasons. Our son Christopher, his first word was tree, and early on I used to read to the children a book by Forrest Carter called The Education of Little Tree, in which the Cherokee idea of taking no more than you can use made a lot of sense to me as a way to relate to the earth in a green way. So Little Tree Farm is what we still call it. We came from the city. We were little trees that have learned to grow into something bigger over these 4 decades. In 1976, I think, I started construction of our log home, which is not a cabin, it's a log home, by cutting down the trees and pulling them out by ox team on a wagon. One other man and I spent 2 years building the house, and even before it was finished, we lived in just one room of the house. The site for the house is on a little knoll that overlooks our hayfield. It's higher than the hayfields, but lower than the highest point of the farm, which kind of reflects the idea of man's place in the great chain of being. I like that. You respect the land. You don't put your house on the highest point to dominate the landscape. We had to cut a lot of trees, and the bigger ones had to be pulled by the oxen to several central sites where we took off the bark and then stacked them 2 deep in the shade to dry. And then came back 6 months later and loaded them on a wagon and pulled them out. I remember some of the logs were well over 30 feet long, and we're pulling them on a wagon that was considerably shorter, and going down some of the hills, the front wheels of the wagon were lifting off the ground, and that's not an easy thing to control. The oxen also pulled the logs from a field near where the house was built. They had to pull them up to the house site, and then the other fellow and I rolled them up inclined planes into the house. We didn't want to use an internal combustion engine. I thought about mules and ponies and horses and oxen and decided that oxen least likely to kill me or injure me, not having worked with draft animals before. We used the oxen in a yearly round of activity that started with firewood in the fall. It took us into early January, and then we started getting ready for making maple syrup, cutting firewood for that. The first firewood was for our house, and then in the spring we might do some logging with the oxen, followed by maybe some construction on the farm. It seems like we were always building things. And then learning how to use the equipment needed to harvest our hay with the oxen. And I figured I walked 50 miles each sugar season, because with the oxen you walked beside them rather than sitting behind them with reins as you would with horses. And then we would take a break in the summertime, usually to tend the gardens. And of course, there was the harvest time in the fall, and then back at cutting firewood with the oxen. And somewhere in there, we might do a little bit of plowing, a little bit of fitting of the land, building of fences. It was an endless seasonal round, and it seemed like everything you did took a month to do. And just when you were getting sick and tired of it, you could stop and do something else. So it was a wonderful yearly round of activity for quite a few years. Yesterday, the day the last oxen left, 43 years after the first oxen arrived, there was a photo of me, skinny and old but erect, at 73, leading Zach from his stall toward the door of the barn. The long cattle trailer, with its 3 deep bays, one beyond the other, had room for a lot more than enough for 73 years of former selves, those phantoms that continue to exfoliate behind me. I, the latest incarnation, walking beside each ghost, gently leading it into the trailer and letting go. We were little trees that have learned to grow into something bigger over these 4 decades.